welcome back to my channel. I hope you are having a wonderful day. In today's video, I am using something from my stash that I made. That's this dry embossed polka dot background. Any embossing folder or stencil would work. I just wanted something that had just a little bit of texture. And then I have a A2 size panel. I'm going to use that to do my stamping and stenciling. If you watched my Mother's Day series where I made stationery sets for some of the women in my family, this stamp set looks familiar. This is the Altenew Rosa Galica from Altenew, and I'm going to actually use the other stamp in that set today, and this sentiment's from there. This Build a Garden kit from Altenew comes with the stamp, it comes with stencils, and it comes with dies, which I personally am a huge fan of. I am intimidated quite a bit by coloring, and so these coloring stencils are really helpful for me. In true Altenew fashion, they have these layering guides in there that show you color inspiration, design layouts. They also give you information on what to color where, and so I actually do refer to that in this video. I did know that I needed to have stencil 1 and 2 in order to color in this particular stamp. So I wanted to have kind of like a corally pinkish orangey flower and some teal greenery. And so these are the colors that I chose, and I chose Sunkissed, Canyon Clay, Marigold, and Caramel Toffee, and then I chose Galactic Stream, Aqualicious, and Teal Cave. For this little background, this dry emboss background, I'm just going to ink blend kind of lightly around the edges. I have a piece of just scrap copy paper underneath to help kind of keep my work surface clean, so I have a little less to clean up. I'm going to grab my little Positively Everything tool to hold that ink pad in place. If I were using several ink pads to do ink blending, I would get my little corner mini ink cube holder from Simon, but since I just have this one that I'm working with at a time, I really don't need that big guy. So I just wanted a little bit of color off to the side there. I do end up trimming this down, so I try to blend in just a little bit further than I thought I would need, because I knew if I had too much on there, I could always cut it off or start over. But I just wanted a little bit of color on there. It looks really splotchy on screen. The beauty about some of these Altenew Crisp dye inks is that they do kind of smooth out as you go, and as they dry into the paper, they do kind of smooth out, and it doesn't look nearly as bad in real life as it does on screen. I feel like Amy Rasavi from Prayer Paper and Ink, she always talks about how her camera makes her ink blending look terrible. Now I totally understand what she's talking about. So I finished just kind of adding some color to the edges of that, and now I moved on, and I'm going to stamp this cluster. And I just have that little A2 size panel that I'm going to stamp this on. I wanted to have, in my head, I wanted to have kind of like a no line coloring look, but have a line, so that I knew where to place all these stencils. So that when I went to die cut it, it was a lot easier. And so I took the Caramel Toffee, which is kind of like the second to darkest color I used. I should have, in hindsight, used a lighter color, but for some reason I went with this darker one. So if I were to do this card again, I would use the lighter of the colors that I had. But this still, I ended up actually going back and stamping this in black. I contemplated it for a long time. But I do eventually go back and color that and stamp that in black. You can tell me in the comments below if you think that I should have left it with the brown, or if you think I should have stuck with the black. You can tell me what you think. I actually got a pretty good impression the very first time. You saw me kind of rub my hands over that stamp. I've never used it before, and so with photopolymer stamps, there's usually like a manufacturing coating on there that kind of repels the ink, and so I just rubbed my hand over it to get some of that off. And I did actually stamp that down and got a pretty good impression the first time. I'm going to leave that stamp inside that Misty, and I'm super glad I did, because like I said, I did go back and stamp that again, and I didn't have to worry about misaligning that or getting like a double stamping because I kept everything in place. I lined up that first stencil. This is the stencil that covers the big bloom. And with layering stencils, and layering stamps, you go from lightest to darkest. So the lightest color is always the stencil that has the most open area. This is true for not only layering stencils, but also layering stamps. Now, layering dies are typically the opposite. Your darkest color is usually the first one, and that has the most area. And then you build to the lightest from there. So this is the SUNKISSED, and I'm just using a very light hand and ink blending just a very light layer of that SUNKISSED. And then I'm going to move on to the second stencil, and I'm going to use the Canyon clay for this. I got that all lined up. The first and second stencil were pretty easy to line up. I try to find some sort of like notch on the stencil that matches the stamp really well, that's very distinctive, and that helps me get things lined up well. So this is where that pinkish color kind of came in. I wish I would have done another kind of pinky color, but I didn't. Decisions were made. So this is more of an orangey flower than a pinky corally flower, but that's okay. So that was the second stencil, and then I'm going to move on to Marigold, which is the third. And I actually had to refer to the layering guide for this one because I rotated this around forever. And here I'm just showing you that I had to refer to that layering guide in order to figure out how to layer that. So I am very grateful for Altenew thinking ahead and providing us with those layering guides. Most of the time it's not that difficult, but this time I was just on the struggle bus, and so I had to use that layering guide to help me. This is the Marigold, and then the final one, which actually does more of like the center or the polleny portions. Are those called stamen? I don't know. I'm not a botanist or do horticulture, and so I don't know. I think they're called a stamen though. Maybe the pistil? I don't know, folks. But anyway, it does like the polleny bits of the flower and flower center. And so that's where that caramel toffee came in. And on the stencil number 2, I finally discover where like that lines up. Yeah, I was on the struggle bus. But anyway, I used the caramel toffee for the kind of polleny parts of this particular flower. And I also switched to my little mini ink blending brushes, just because this was a smaller area and I really didn't want to get the ink where I didn't want it. There's a small flower cluster on that stencil too, and I really didn't want to get any of that ink over there. And so I switched to those smaller ink blending brushes, and I purchased those off of Amazon. They look very similar to the Pink Fresh Studio ones, not only in size, but in like design and color. So I really like them. I think they work really well. They suck up a lot of ink, but they're also still very easy to kind of clean off and brush off. So I really like them. And they were significantly cheaper so that I could get... This is kind of my thought process here. So I would rather spend less money on tools so that I can spend more money on stamps and dies and that kind of stuff. The only exception is like tools like a MISTI or like a SPELLBINDERS die cutting machine, stuff like that. Like those are tools that you want to spend some money on, in my opinion. And so I do spend some money on those things, but tools like blending brushes and things like that, I would rather find an Amazon version that's a lot cheaper so that I can spend the money that I save on fun things like stamp sets. So I colored in those small flowers with that Canyon clay. I was just trying to bring in some more of that pink color. And now I'm moving on to the greenery. So this particular stamp has, what is it? Two layers to do the foliage. And what I just pointed to there, I didn't realize this, but that is actually a bud. So in hindsight, if I was paying more attention, I was in a time crunch. I had a screaming 5-week-old downstairs, and I was worried about the 2-year-old waking up, and we had somewhere to be in a little bit. So I was kind of in a hurry, and, you know, looking back, I would have spent a little more time and been a little more aware, but it turned out fine. So that first layer was the AQUALISCIOUS. The second layer is the Teal Cave. And then the third layer is not really the third layer. It does the greenery. The Galactic Stream is not really like a third layer, but I use that on the foliage around those tiny flowers just because I wanted them to stand out a little different, stand out a little better. And I really wanted to incorporate some of this really dark, delicious jewel toned teal. So we're just finishing up the second layer on these bigger leaves around these larger flowers and that bud that I didn't know was there. And then we'll move on to the Galactic Stream on those smaller flowers. This is where I figured out that, oh, that is the center to this flower, and that's how it's supposed to line up. So, you know, hindsight is always 20/20. Again, this is the first time I've used this particular stamp and this particular stencil. So my Galactic Stream was very, very juicy. So that was pretty awesome. I knew I definitely didn't need to reapply that one. And isn't that just like a beautiful, like teal? Beautiful teal. So I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, I really like how that brown, that caramel toffee looks against those teal leaves. But I wasn't really over the moon about how it looked next to the flowers themselves. And so I just kind of left it for a little bit. I went and checked on the infant and the newborn, and then I came back to it. And I decided that I was going to go ahead and do the black outline. You can tell me in the comments below if you think I should have kept it with my attempt at a no line, or if you like the black better. I'd be curious as to what you think. Both were okay. You know, both were pretty. Both, I mean, it's not like I messed it up, but I guess just wonder what your preference was. So again, I am glad that I kept that stamp in there because that gave me the ability to stamp this again and not worry about double stamping the image. So pretty grateful for that. Here is that Hero Art scrubber block. Y'all, I really am really, really, really enjoying this thing. It gets my stamps super clean without any lint, which when I clean my stamps directly from like my scrubber or directly with that like flour sackcloth, it's like super, I just get lint a lot of the time. And I don't really like that because it gets on my stamps and it can sometimes make it to where it stamps fuzzies. I feel like I'm stamping fuzzies. So I really am enjoying this Hero Art scrubbing block, but I have learned that it works better for me if I spray my stamp cleaner on the block and bring the block to the paper or to the stamp instead of spraying the stamp. So anyway, I chose some sentiments from that Galactic Rosa Galica stamp set. That stamp set comes with a stamp to die cut out the word you and I think happy. I think it cuts out both of those words. So I used the coordinating die from that Rosa Galica to cut out the U, and then I used a Spellbinders die to cut out the are enough. And then I'm going to use the coordinating die to cut out the flower itself. And I'm going to run those through my die cut machine. And then I'm going to actually stack up the flower and the U. I'm going to cut those out 2 more times, use some liquid glue to adhere them all together. And then I'm going to cut off about 1/8 of an inch from each end of my little dry embossed and lightly ink blended panel. I wanted just a little bit of a white border on each, on the sides of my card base to show. And so just about 1/8 of an inch off of each side was good enough for me. And then I'm going to glue that down flat with some liquid glue. I played around with placement for a little bit, but decided to make this a portrait instead of landscape card. And then I went through my stash of sequins. I purchased these off of Amazon and just decided to put 3 of these kind of dark teal ones that match that galactic stream kind of around the sentiment. And then that is it. I paired this with a envelope from Paper Studio that matched kind of the teal from those leaves. And that is it. That is the card. So I appreciate you spending time with me today. I hope you feel inspired. And until then, we will see you next time. Bye.